A very good afternoon to all of us, all the listeners and viewers who are here. Uh, I hope I'm audible. I think I can see Dr. Abhishek Singhai and Dr. Ambar Kumar. So, am I audible here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes,
Sure.
sir.
Sure. So, as we are moving towards 1 year of onset of COVID infection globally, December was a time when first cases were kind of officially reported in Wuhan, China. And we have been through last 1 year and we have been through an ordeal of containment, taking care of patients, looking up, witnessing higher mortalities. And now we are moving into, in parallel to some amount of cases which are still there, although much less as compared to earlier. We are now also moving into a post-COVID era. And something which is very important and useful for us to understand is that number of patients are now coming back to OPDs with a previous COVID infection, and they may have various symptoms. It's important to understand what we know globally as far as what kind of symptoms patients have returned with and which symptoms are important, which symptoms may be important, but from the patient's perspective, but may have a limited medical view. Nonetheless, the whole evidence globally is gradually accumulating. So we have two talks today. The first one is by Dr. Abhishek Singhai, who is a faculty in medicine at All India Institute Medical Sciences, Bhopal. He'll be talking about relevance of post-COVID symptoms, how many of them are a reality and how many of them are more of a myth. Followed by another talk by Dr. Ambar Kumar, who is a faculty in Department of Pediatrics at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Bhopal. He will be talking about peculiar symptoms in pediatric age group in children. And again, the frequency and relevance as far as these symptoms are concerned. We'll have these two back-to-back talks, and we'll take all your questions at the end after these two talks are over. So without wasting much of a time, I'll welcome Dr. Abhishek Singhai and would request him to have his presentation and initiate his talk. Dr. Abhishek Singhai, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is my screen is visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, it is visible. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Joshi sir, to providing me this opportunity to present this topic. So it's almost a year since world is facing COVID-19, and now along with new cases, we are getting rising number of patients who have recovered from acute illness of COVID-19, but are suffering from long-term persistent effect of the infection. These are called post-COVID symptoms. So today's lecture on post-COVID symptom is very pertinent to current scenario. So introduction, for many COVID survivors, testing negative is only half the battle won. Some patient may develop post-COVID syndrome in which they experience persistent symptom after recovering from initial illness phase. The syndrome appears to affect those with mild as well as moderate to severe disease. These persistent symptoms pose new challenge to patient, healthcare providers, and public health practitioners also. The post-COVID syndrome must be tackled with clinical assessment, psychological intervention, and comprehensive rehabilitative care. Definition, there's no consensus on definition. Clinically, we can define post-COVID syndrome as persistent of symptom beyond 3 weeks from the onset of first symptom. Some author further subdivide into acute and chronic post-COVID syndrome. So symptom persistent beyond 3 weeks are called acute post-COVID syndrome, and symptom persistent up to 12 weeks, then it is called chronic post-COVID syndrome. So it is not known why some people recovery is prolonged. So there may be some hypothesis like persistent viremia due to weak or absent antibody response, relapse or reinfection, inflammatory or other immune reactions, deconditioning, and mental factors such as post-traumatic stress may all contribute. And these type of syndrome are also seen with other coronavirus like severe acute respiratory syndrome and Middle East respiratory syndrome virus. So pathophysiology may be same as other coronavirus disease. What are the symptoms of post-COVID syndrome? So there are various studies that has been done in Spain, Italy, China, and Brazil to define post-COVID syndrome. So this Carmelo et al. Has done a study on 150 patients with non-critical COVID-19 patient, and he has done follow-up on day 7, day 30, and day 60 of discharge. So he has seen that 68% of patient had at least one symptom at day 30 of discharge, falling to 66% as day 60. Most common persistent symptom was anosmia that was seen in 59% cases at symptom onset, followed by 28% at day 30 and 23% had symptom at day 60. Dyspnea occurs in 36.7% patient at day 30 and 30% at day 60. And asthenia occurs in half of the patient at day 30 and 40% at day 60. Karfi et al. Has done a study and they assessed the patient at 60 days after onset of first COVID symptom. So they found that 87% of patient had persistent symptom. 32% had 1 or 2% symptom, while 55% had 3 or more persistent symptoms. Most common reported symptoms were fatigue in 53%, then dyspnea, then asthenia, chest pain, and 1% of the patient reported a worsened quality of life. In a study by Garres et al., they have done phone-based survey study of the patient diagnosed with COVID-19 who had been discharged. The mean time of interview after admission was 110 days, and most common reported symptoms were fatigue, dyspnea, memory loss, sleep disorder, followed by difficulty with concentration. This study was published recently in JAMA. So, in this, author found that most common persistent symptom were fatigue that was seen in more than 50% of cases, followed by dyspnea in more than 40% cases, joint pain in around 24%, then chest pain, cough, anosmia, Zika syndrome, rhinitis, red eyes, headache, sputum production, sore throat, vertigo. Here, one thing to be noted that fever is not a common symptom of post-COVID syndrome. So based on all these study, I've summarized the symptom of post-COVID syndrome. So fatigue can be seen in 59% of cases, dyspnea in 40% cases, joint pain in 23% cases, chest pain 20%, brain fog including an inability to concentrate and impair memory in 18% cases, loss of taste or smell in 15%, sleep issues in 10%, and fever is not common in post-COVID syndrome. So what tests are required in post-COVID syndrome patients? So blood tests should be ordered selectively and for specific clinical indication. After a careful history and examination, the patient may not need any. Anemia should be excluded in the breathless patient. And biomarker may be tested like C-reactive protein, raised values seen in acute infection, raised WBC count suggest infection or inflammatory response, raised brain natriuretic peptides suggest heart failure, raised ferritin value suggests inflammation or continuing prothrombotic state, raised troponin value may suggest acute coronary syndrome or myocarditis, and raised D-dimer suggest thromboembolic disease. Among these biomarkers, troponin and D-dimer test may be falsely positive, but a negative result can reduce clinical uncertainty. So for patients who were not admitted to intensive care, British Thoracic Society guidelines on follow-up of COVID-19 patient who had a significant respiratory illness proposes they should do community follow-up with a chest X-ray at 12 weeks and referral for new persistent or progressive symptom. And in chest X-ray, they found lung damage such as persistent abnormal chest X-ray or oximeter reading showing hypoxia. So these patients should be referred for respiratory service. These are CT manifestations seen in the follow-up CT scan of the COVID-19 patient. So common findings are ground glass opacities, then fibrous stripe, then bronchovascular bundle distortion, thickening of the adjacent pleura, and lastly, small pleural effusion. So these are serial CT scan done in the COVID-19 patient. So this was CT scan at the time of discharge, followed by CT scan at the end of first week, then CT scan second week and third week. So here we can see that all these findings, ground glass opacities, then fibrous bands, then bronchovascular distortion, these all decrease by the 3 weeks of discharge. These are CT scan findings of COVID-19 patients. So common findings are ground glass opacities in the lower lobe and the peripheral region of the lung. And these faded by the end of first week of resolution. These are serial CT scan of the same patient of COVID-19. So fibrous band starts appearing at the end of 2 weeks of illness. And these are CT scan done at the end of 15 days, then 1 month and 3 month interval. So we can see gradually with time, these fibrous type also got absorbed. Now management of post-COVID syndrome. So they are not at definitive evidence-based recommendation for the management of post-COVID syndrome. We therefore used a pragmatic approach based on published studies, early editorial and consensus-based guidance on the COVID-19 and our own clinical experience. So first, respiratory symptoms and support. So most common respiratory symptom is dyspnea. So a degree of dyspnea is common after COVID-19, and severe dyspnea, which was not there in which is rare in a patient who are not hospitalized, may require urgent referral. And dyspnea tends to improve with breathing exercises. Pulse oximeter is extremely useful for assessing and monitoring respiratory symptom after COVID-19. Hypoxia may reflect impaired oxygen diffusion is a recognized feature of COVID-19. It may be asymptomatic, so-called silent or happy hypoxia, or symptomatic, reflecting increased work of breathing or secondary pathology such as bacterial pneumonia or thromboembolism. So an exertional desaturation test should be performed as a part of baseline assessment for patient whose resting pulse oximeter reading is 96% or above, but whose symptoms suggest exertional desaturation, such as patient is giving history that he feel lightheadedness or severe breathlessness on exertion. So what we do in exertional desaturation test, we can do 6-minute walk test. So in this, patient is invited to repeat the oximeter reading after 6-minute walk on a flat surface or spending 1 minute doing sit to stand as fast as they can. And a fall of 3% in the saturation, oxygen saturation reading on mild exertion is abnormal and required investigation. Respiratory symptom is cough. Unless there are signs of superinfection or other complications such as painful pleural inflammation, cough seems to be best managed with simple breathing control exercise and medication. Like if we are suspecting gastroesophageal reflux, then proton pump inhibitor can be advised. And breathing techniques such as diaphragmatic breathing, slow breathing, pursed lip breathing, yoga technique, these are useful for managing cough as well as breathlessness. Most common symptom of post-COVID is fatigue. So the profound and prolonged nature of fatigue in some post-COVID syndrome patients share feature with chronic fatigue syndrome described after other serious infections like SARS, MERS, or community-acquired pneumonia. And we found no published research evidence on efficacy of pharmacological intervention on fatigue after COVID-19. So they can be given simply multivitamin or adequate diet should be advised to control fatigue. Now, cardiopulmonary complication assessment and management. So perhaps 20% of patients admitted with severe COVID-19 have clinically significant cardiac involvement, and occult involvement may be even commoner. So cardiopulmonary complications include myocarditis, pericarditis, myocardial infarction, dysarrhythmia, and pulmonary embolism. And they may present several weeks after acute COVID-19. They are commoner in patients with pre-existing cardiovascular disease, but they have also been seen in young, previously active patients. And various pathophysiology mechanism has been proposed, like viral infiltration, inflammation, microthrombi formation, and down regulation of angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptors. Second common cardiovascular symptom is chest pain, and chest pain is common in post-COVID syndrome. The clinical priority is to separate musculoskeletal and other non-specific chest pain from serious cardiovascular conditions. We should follow same principle that we follow in other patients. So we should take careful history, taking account of the past medical history, risk factor, and physical examination, and then further investigation accordingly. Where the diagnosis is uncertain or the patient is acutely unwell, urgent cardiology referral may be needed for specialist assessment and investigations like echocardiography, CT chest, or cardiac MRI. Thromboembolism. COVID-19 is an inflammatory and hypercoagulable state with an increased risk of thromboembolic events. Many hospitalized patients receive prophylactic anticoagulation, And recommendation for anticoagulation after discharge vary, but high-risk patient can be given extended thromboprophylaxis. In the way we can extend that oral anticoagulant for next 10 days after discharge. If the patient has been diagnosed with thrombotic episode, then we should follow standard guideline. Generally, we prescribe 6 months more anticoagulation. Then left ventricular systolic dysfunction and heart failure after COVID-19 can be managed according to standard guidelines. Intense cardiovascular exercise must be avoided for 3 months in all patients after myocarditis or pericarditis, with return to activities guided by functional status, biomarker, absence of dysarrhythmia, and evidence of normal left ventricular systolic function. Neurological manifestations, ischemic stroke, seizures, encephalitis, and cranial neuropathy have been described after COVID-19, but these all seems to be rare. Common non-specific neurological symptoms such seems to co-occur with fatigue and breathlessness like headache, dizziness, cognitive blunting can be occur. These all require supportive management. Old they seems to be affected more by COVID-19, and those who survive are at high risk of sarcopenia, malnutrition, depression, and delirium. Mental health and well-being. Lay accounts suggest that post-COVID-19 is often associated with low mood, hopelessness, heightened anxiety, and difficulty in sleeping. And post-traumatic stress disorder may occur especially in healthcare worker and occurs with caring responsibility. This is the busy slide, but describing most of the facts of today's lecture. So post-COVID syndrome, there are other name also, like it is also called long COVID syndrome or long haulers. So ideal time to reassess the patient is 3 weeks. So then we should clinically assess the patient. We should take full history and current symptom nature and their severity. And these patients should be examined for temperature, heart rate and rhythm, blood pressure, respiratory examination. Functional status means how much these symptoms are affecting his daily routine activity. Then pulse oximetry, and clinical testing. So if patients are febrile, there's no pallor, vitals are normal, maintaining saturation, and respiratory examination is not showing any crepitation or wheezing, then we should reassure this patient. This patient does not require further testing. We should assess for social and financial circumstances, like somebody has lost their job, they are having financial problem, food poverty. So these factors should be taken in consideration. And then we should assess the comorbidities. Many of them are hypertensive, diabetes, are having kidney disease, ischemic heart disease. So we should see whether these comorbidities are adequately controlled or not. If any of these findings are abnormal, patients having hypoxia or respiratory examination showing crepitation, we are suspecting heart failure, then we should proceed for further investigation. So there are some blood tests and then other radiological investigation. All tests are not needed in all patients. We should individualize these tests. So among these, we can go for full blood count, electrolyte, liver and renal function test, troponin, C-reactive protein, creatine kinase, D-dimer, BNP, and ferritin, and other investigation like chest X-ray, 12-lead ECG. Management-wise, we should give symptomatic treatment to this patient. Like if patients having fever, then paracetamol. Optimize control of long-term conditions like diabetes, hypertension. Listening and empathy. Sometime only listening to them and reassuring them will help. Then consider antibiotic for secondary infection and treat specific complication as indicated. These patients should continue to monitor themselves at home by daily pulse oximetry, attention to general health like adequate diet and sleep, quit smoking, limit alcohol intake, limit caffeine. They should take proper rest and relaxation, and self-pacing and gradual increase in exercise if tolerated. And we should set achievable target to them. Now, when we should refer this patient? So if they are having worsening breathlessness, they are having hypoxia, unexplained chest pain, new onset confusion, or focal weakness. So we should sort for respiratory consultation if we are suspecting pulmonary embolism or severe pneumonia. Cardiology consultation if we are suspecting myocardial infarction, pericarditis, myocarditis, or new heart failure. Neurology consultation if there is any neurovascular deficit or any acute neurological event. And lastly, pulmonary rehabilitation may be indicated if patient has persistent breathlessness following review. So to summarize, management of COVID-19 after the first 3 weeks is currently based on limited evidence. Approximately 50% of people experience prolonged illness after acute COVID-19. So post-COVID symptom is not a myth; it's a reality. Many such patients recover spontaneously with holistic support, rest, symptomatic treatment, and gradual increase in activity. Home pulse oximetry can be helpful in monitoring breathlessness. An indication for specialist assessment include respiratory, cardiac, or neurological symptoms that are new, persistent, or progressive. Thank you all for patience listening. Any question, doubt, then we can take at the end of other lecture.
Yeah, I think we can take questions at the end. So, Dr. Abhishek, if you could stop slide sharing, that would be useful. Okay, great. Dr. Jyoti is with us. She is from Jhpiego, who is providing us support for all our activities. So I'll request her to give a brief introduction about RISE and introduce the next speaker, please.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Rajneesh and Dr. Abhishek. So I'm Dr. Jyoti. I'm from Jhpiego. So I'd like to say that I'm very thankful to Dr. Rajneesh Joshi, who is the in charge of COVID-19 in AIIMS Bhopal. So Government of Madhya Pradesh, Department of Health and Family Welfare, in collaboration with Center of Excellence AIIMS Bhopal and RISE project, which is USAID project led by Jhpiego. So we are providing technical support. So RISE is reaching impact and saturation in epidemic control. So through this program, we are trying to organize series of webinars and on COVID. Like today is the first webinar in this series. And we are very hopeful that you all will be benefited by this webinar. And the experts from AIIMS and the prestigious institutions will be speaking on various topics, and we will also request all of you to share the topics which you want to listen more, and so that we'll try to organize more webinars on those topics. So thank you so much, Government of Madhya Pradesh, Commissioner Sir, and other teams at the Directorate of Health Services, then AIIMS Bhopal, and all of you. And we hope that this webinar will be of benefit for you. And now I would request Dr. Ambar Sharma, Dr. Ambar Kumar, to speak the next topic. Thank you so much. Dr. Ambar, please.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Joshi sir, for giving me this opportunity, and thank you, Jhpiego. And I will start sharing my screen. Yeah. After a wonderful talk by Abhishek sir, my job is now a little bit simple, and I will focus on only one symptoms that is unique for children. And others sir has already covered all the post-COVID symptoms, and pediatrics experience is very limited regarding post-COVID symptoms. But this is a unique evolved in April 2020, and the first case was detected in UK. And they labeled this case as pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome, temporarily associated with SARS coronavirus 2. And they labeled this case as PIMS-TS. And then after that, all over the world, multiple cases of multisystem inflammatory syndrome was detected in children. And in the USA, and the CDC and WHO has labeled this syndrome as multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, MISC. So I will focus on this syndrome only. So coming to case definition. So there is no standard investigation that can prove this syndrome in children, but there is some criteria based on this we can diagnose this case. So WHO has defined this case if you have all these 6 parameters. First one is age 0 to 19 years, although CDC defined up to 21 years, and fever is must for 3 or more days fever. And the third symptom is involvement of multi-system involvement, 2 or more system. So these there are 5 criteria, out of which 2 must be there. First one is skin and eye lesions, that is rash. bilateral non-purulent conjunctivitis or mucocutaneous inflammation. Second is hypotension or shock, hemodynamic compromise. Third one is cardiac involvement like cardiac dysfunction, pericarditis, valvulitis, or coronary abnormalities. That is by either echo or by biomarkers like BNP and troponin. And the fourth one is evidence of coagulopathy by PT, APTT, and D-dimer. And fifth one is acute GI symptoms, gastrointestinal symptoms. So out of these, two must be there, means to consider this as multi-system involvement. And the fourth parameter is elevated inflammatory marker like ESR, CRP, and procalcitonin. Fifth one is no other obvious microbial cause of inflammation. And last one is definitely the evidence of COVID-19 infection must be there either by PCR test or by serology test or by antigen test or history of contact with positive case. So as the name itself is explanatory, multi-system inflammatory. So multi-system involvement must be there. Inflammatory, so signs of inflammation like fever and elevated inflammatory marker must be there. And in children, that's why the age group is 0 to 19. So the definition itself explains the criteria of WHO. And definitely we have to rule out the other microbial cause like staph or streptococcal toxic shock syndrome. So that we have to rule out, and evidence of COVID-19 infection must be there. The CDC and Royal College of Pediatrics and Childhood by UK has almost similar definition, but they are slightly broader concept, and they have expanded the definition based on the resemblance of syndrome to Kawasaki disease. So coming to the clinical manifestations of this syndrome, this study was published in the Circulation, and this was the retrospective study done in the French study. This was the French study. And they have involved in the inclusion criteria was to include all the cases of cardiogenic shock or congestive cardiac failure presented in their ward or ICU. And so as we are seeing, all the red colors are the manifestations similar to Kawasaki disease, and the other black one is unique for multi-system inflammatory syndrome related to COVID-19. So the bulbar conjunctivitis, red and cracked lips, cervical and ventricular lymphadenopathy, skin rash, and the coronary involvement are common for Kawasaki and multi-system inflammatory syndrome. But the neurological sign, some respiratory signs, and the most common is the GI symptoms. The GI symptoms are the most common in the multi-system inflammatory syndrome related to COVID-19. So now coming to investigations. So the common investigations, CBC will reveal neutrophilia and lymphopenia. That is the typical of MIS. And anemia and thrombocytopenia may be there. Coming to biochemistry, hypoalbuminemia is very common. The other manifestation of hyponatremia and deranged RFT and LFT may be there. Inflammatory markers, CRP, ESR, and procalcitonin will be elevated, typically very in high quantity. And the coagulation study will show elevated PT, APTT, and D-dimer. D-dimer may be elevated to a quite high level. Fibrinogen level may be high. Coming to cardiac markers, troponin and BNP level will be elevated. And the COVID-19 testing will show either PCR positivity or antigen positivity or antibody test positivity. But most of the patient has shown antibody positive. Almost 80% has shown antibody positivity, and PCR test is positive in less than 20% cases. So the imaging finding, chest radiograph may show non-specific unilateral or bilateral infiltrates. Echocardiogram shows myocarditis like LV systolic dysfunction, coronary artery dilation, valvulitis, or pericardial effusion. And this dilation and aneurysm of coronary artery may develop during the disease course also. The ultrasonography of abdomen may reveal hepatosplenomegaly, lymphadenopathy, bowel wall edema, or ascites. The ECG manifestations are heart block, first degree, second degree, third degree, any kind. Increased QT interval, ventricular arrhythmias, and ST segmental elevation. So basically, all these ECG finding is because of inflamed myocardium or the edema of the myocardium, and that will get resolved after the treatment. So all these manifestations is because of myocarditis. So coming to pathogenesis, that is the postulated hypothesis. There are two main hypotheses. First one is antibody-dependent enhancement of COVID-19. So what this antibody is doing, the antibody, IgG antibody, is helping in COVID-19 virus to introduce into the cell, and then the lysis of the cell will release the cytokine secretion, and ultimately it will lead to cytokine storm. But the second mechanism is antibody or T cell mediated cell damage and activation of inflammation. So this is like a molecular mimicry. The antibodies or T cell, they attack cells expressing the viral antigen, and or can attack the host antigen, which is because of molecular mimicry. So the second one is most accepted hypothesis because in most of the cases of MIS, we have not detected the virus. So low rate of virus detection in the MIS favors this mechanism. So coming to literature review, I have included the three major studies. One is UK study that includes the 58 patients, and second one is USA study of 186 patients, and the last one is Indian study that is the most recent, that is from the Mumbai, that included the 23 patients. So the common features of fever are universal in all of them. Abdominal pain was and GI symptom was common in the all of them, and Kawasaki disease like manifestation was similar in all the cases. So, and if you see the COVID-19 test, so most of them has antibody positivity, 87% in the UK study and 70% in the USA study. But the Mumbai study has shown antibody positivity in 30%, PCR positive in 39%, and history of contact in 35%. And if you see the management part, the IVIG has been used universally. This is based on the experience with the Kawasaki disease, because the illness is very much similar to Kawasaki disease. So everyone has used the same treatment like Kawasaki disease, IVIG and steroid. So IVIG has been used in more than 70% cases and steroid also in the more than 50% cases. But the Indian study, the Mumbai study has shown IVIG use of 65% and steroid in 100% cases because of cost issue and availability issue of IVIG. Otherwise, almost similar finding everyone has the similar finding. The most important thing is outcome was very good. Death was reported in only 2% in UK and USA study and 4% in the Indian study. But the Indian study was only of 23%, that is still ongoing, and only one death was reported. But the coronary artery abnormality was detected more in the Indian study, almost in 26%, and others has 14% and 8%. So this is the recent pooled meta-analysis of patient. They have included all the studies till the July, and almost 39 studies that is mostly on the case series and their case reports, but they have included all the 39 studies, and based on this we can see the GI manifestation was the most common, and the Kawasaki disease-like illness was also common. And if you see the lab finding, the serological test was positive in almost 80% cases, and RT-PCR was positive in almost 30-35% cases. The D-dimer was elevated significantly in almost all patients. And if you see the treatment part, the most important and the most good news was that the death was reported in only 11 patients out of 660 patients, which they have included in the 39 studies. Only 11 deaths was reported, and almost everyone has recovered. So that is the most important part of this meta-analysis. So coming to differential diagnosis of this disease, if you see the first is the Kawasaki disease, which is common in the less than 5 year of age group, but the MIS-C, the median age of MIS-C is 10 years. And to differentiate from Kawasaki disease, MIS-C has a more common feature of abdominal pain, and the severity is also more than that in the classical Kawasaki disease. Thrombocytopenia, anemia, and lymphopenia is common in Kawasaki disease, elevated in the MIS-C related to COVID-19. And the elevated level of ferritin, troponin, BNP, and D-dimer is more in MIS-C related to COVID-19. If you want to rule out the toxic shock syndrome, then toxic shock syndrome, usually we have to find out the blood culture report of staph and streptococcus that is necessary for diagnosis. The third differential is bacterial sepsis and septic shock. That is, they are the life-threatening systemic syndrome caused by microbial infection and dysregulated physiological response. And the presentation varies depending on the source of infection, but that includes the fever, tachypnea, tachycardia, hypotension, and signs of tissue hypoperfusion. But the differentiating point is the rash, lip change, ocular change, and edema of hand and feet are very unusual in septic shock syndrome. And diagnosis is again based on the recovery of pathogen by culture or other means. The fourth differential is dengue and dengue-related HLH. That is especially relevant in tropical setting and is very important to rule out dengue infection. So coming to admission criteria of MIS-C, see whether the case is meeting the criteria or not, or under evaluation. If these are the signs in this case, then we have to admit abnormal vital signs, respiratory distress to any degree, neurological deficit, hepatic or renal dysfunction, even if mild, then we have to admit for evaluation, marked elevation of inflammatory markers, abnormal ECG or serum markers of cardiac injury like troponin T and BNP. And criteria for ICU admission is definitely shock and impending shock. Both are criteria for admission, and patient who need mechanical ventilation. Now coming to goals of MISC management, the goals are to reverse the shock and to reverse the organ dysfunction and prevent further injury and complications like coronary artery aneurysm and acute kidney injury. To date, there are no widely accepted guidelines on the management of MISC. Both are everyone is based on the experience with the Kawasaki disease treatment experience or COVID-19 treatment guidelines for adult patients and case reports. But the multidisciplinary team approach should be taken, including a pediatric infectious disease specialist, cardiologist, immunology, and rheumatology and intensive care team. So this is the American College of Rheumatology flow chart for management of MISC. This is a very simple flow chart. The upper one shows the screening criteria of MISC. If all the screening criteria is there and the child has shock also, then we have to do the complete diagnostic evaluation. That includes the tier 1 and tier 2 evaluation investigations. And if the child does not have shock, then we have to investigate for MISC with the tier 1 investigation only. So tier 1 investigations are simply the CBC, complete metabolic panel like RFT and LFT, ESR, CRP, and COVID-19 testing. And if the result shows elevated CRP and ESR and at least one of the following features like absolute lymphopenia, thrombocytopenia, hyponatremia, neutrophilia, or hypoalbuminemia, that are the classical signs for MISC, then we have to do the tier 2 investigations. That includes the BNP, troponin T, procalcitonin, ferritin, coagulation profile like PT-APT D-dimer, and LDH urine analysis, cytokine panel also like interleukin 1, interleukin 6, and TNF-alpha, triglyceride, and COVID-19 testing. If not done, then we have to repeat. ECG and echocardiogram is also mandatory. So coming to management part, supportive care is very crucial, especially the vital signs, hydration, electrolyte, and metabolic status. The next part is management of shock. Volume expansion using crystalloid is the first line of management, and anotropes, epinephrine is recommended as first line, but norepinephrine can be added if the shock persists. Using dopamine, especially in cardiogenic shock, is very important for myocardial dysfunction and to avoid fluid overload. The third part of management is anti-inflammatory agent, and all these anti-inflammatory agent treatment is based on the experience with the Kawasaki disease treatment guidelines, that is intravenous immunoglobulin with or without aspirin. Coming to again anti-inflammatory drug, low dose dexamethasone to patient with MISC could be beneficial to suppress the immune response and subsequent inflammatory disorders. That is in line with the UK recovery trial, that is mainly based on the COVID-19 infection in the children. But the same low dose dexamethasone we can use for MISC. That is, MISC actually has a 2 to 4 weeks lag period after the COVID-19 infection, but we can use the dexamethasone here also. Coming to infection, management of infection. So actually the elevated CRP, increased neutrophil all suggest some infective disorder also. So initiation of broad spectrum antibiotic makes it, we can start, that is also seems to be appropriate, but later on we can stop. If we could not find any infection, then we can later on stop. But at the first stage, we should start the broad spectrum antibiotic also. So coming to anticoagulant, based on the elevated D-dimers, so we can start low molecular weight heparin, but the overall there is substantial variability and lack of consensus on the use of anticoagulant. Coming to aspirin, low dose aspirin like 3 to 5 mg per kg used in Kawasaki disease has also been used for MISC, and that can be used for a long period till the follow-up echocardiogram shows the normal coronaries. And the another drug is immunomodulator like infliximab, tocilizumab, and anakinra, but there is no consensus on the use of these agents and very limited experience we have on the use of these agents. But everyone has used first the IVIG, then steroid, and then if patient is not responding, then only they have used the immunomodulator. Coming to antiviral, the remdesivir inhibits the actively replicating virus. So the role of remdesivir is very limited in the case of MISC, because this is post-infectious stage, especially after 2 to 4 weeks of COVID-19 infection. So, and remdesivir acts on the actively replicating virus, RNA polymerase inhibitor. So the role of remdesivir is very limited. However, if the PCR test is positive, not antibody, if the PCR test is positive and child is severely ill, then the remdesivir can be considered in these cases. Coming to monitoring, During acute disease, frequently we have to monitor the laboratory values and till the values stabilize and improve. Serial ECG at least every 48 hours and echocardiogram are appropriate during the acute phase, and follow-up echocardiogram should be obtained 2 weeks and 6 weeks after the discharge to look for the myocardial dysfunction and coronary artery abnormality. The follow-up after discharge from the hospital, children can be discharged from the hospital once the inflammatory laboratory markers have normalized. They are afebrile, they are normotensive, well hydrated, and they do not require supplementary oxygen. Close follow-up is very important because the natural history of MISC is still very unclear. The medium-term to long-term outcomes such as sequelae of coronary artery induced formation following MISC and subsequent risk of thrombosis remains unknown, and that represent an important area of future research. So coming to last 2 slides, the key points of today's presentation. MISC is characterized by persistent fever, live markers of inflammation, and evidence of single or multi-organ dysfunction, including myocarditis. Abdominal and diarrhea are common presenting symptoms. Features suggestive of Kawasaki syndrome like conjunctival and mucosal injection, rash, swelling of hands and feet, coronary artery dilation, or toxic shock syndrome. Some patients develop severe shock and required fluid resuscitation and hemodynamic support. There is no specific diagnostic test. Diagnosis is based on the constellation of clinical, laboratory, echocardiography, and epidemiological factors. Most patients have laboratory evidence of COVID-19 by the antibody test. Patients with mild disease can be managed conservatively. Treat patients who have more severe disease, including those with myocarditis and who have Kawasaki disease or toxic shock syndrome with the IVIG. Corticosteroid immune modulator have also been used, and patients have responded promptly to therapy and have well. Owing to resemblance of Kawasaki syndrome and observation of coronary artery aneurysm in some patients with MISC, serial follow-up echocardiography is recommended.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amber, for this pertinent talk. I'll ask audience if they have any, take those questions. Meanwhile, I had one question for Dr. Amber. I'll quickly ask is,
yes, sir.
How common is multisystem inflammatory syndrome after COVID? Is it, or it's a continuum of an acute COVID syndrome?
Sir, actually we have not seen, in our center, we have not seen any case of COVID-19, this multisystem inflammatory syndrome. But the important is the understanding of the COVID, this multisystem inflammatory syndrome is very limited, and even at the periphery and other centers, they are not aware of this syndrome, so they are misdiagnosed and they are not getting the proper attention. So if everyone knows this syndrome, and then we can get we may get many cases of multisystem inflammatory syndrome, and this is not the continuum, I think so, because the most of the patient in 80% cases the antibody was positive, but the antigen was negative. So the most of them has negative COVID-19 virus, and the second the pathophysiology may be because of this antibody-mediated damage of the molecular mimicry phenomena.
Okay, so essentially, if somebody presents with either a previously known or a previously even unknown COVID-19 infection with a multisystemic involvement, there should be a reasonable degree of suspicion that this may be inflammatory post-COVID syndrome, which can be serious or which can be mild. So there's a spectrum to it, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, sir.
I also had one question, or maybe just an elaboration I'll request from Dr. Abhishek, is that 6-minute walk test is otherwise a simple test. It requires a stopwatch, a pulse oximetry, and an idea of distance. So is it possible that individuals who have pulse oximeters themselves at home can do their own 6-minute walk tests?
Yes, sir. This can be done unmonitored also. So they can monitor at home also and see for desaturation.
So essentially, you need to have your resting oxygen saturation above 94 to begin with, which is considered as normal. And individuals can mark a distance and walk normally as they would normally walk for 6 minutes and see if that saturation drops. and they should be wearing their pulse oximeter while they're walking, so that if there is any drop in saturation, it can be monitored. So it can be done even with simple clip-on pulse oximeters.
Yes. And this can be done for monitoring, for follow-up also, whether there's improvement in the distance they travel in the 6 minutes. So this is having this can prognosticate the disease, and we can do whether they are improving or not by doing serial 6-minute walk test.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Abhishek. So do we have any other questions or any other queries from the audience?
Sir, I would like to ask one question.
Yeah.
So what is the follow-up schedule, if a person is asymptomatic and, recovers from COVID or mild symptomatic? So what is the follow-up schedule for different, grades of patients?
For mild cases, generally we don't advise any follow-up. They should report the healthcare system only if they are having any symptoms. For moderate to severe cases, we ask them to follow up at the end of 3 weeks if they are having persistent symptoms. So for mild cases, as such, there is no follow-up is required if they are asymptomatic.
Okay.
And severe or critical cases require more frequent follow-up. So that we have to individualize the duration.
Just to add to it, although again we still don't have any definitive protocols as such, but we are doing a 4-week and a 12-week follow-up. This is as part of ICMR's COVID registry program. And again, there was one reference in the slide as well of obtaining a chest radiography at end of 12 weeks as part of a British follow-up protocol. So I think maybe in absence of symptoms, obviously no follow-up is required, but in presence of any symptoms, a 4-week and 12-week follow-ups are reasonable. And other follow-ups based on comorbidities. So often patients with comorbidities such as hypertension or diabetes or any vascular phenomena may follow up more frequently based on their disease condition. So we are also developing a system where recordings of these webinars will be available, and we will disseminate that information. We hope that these recordings will be available and hosted through NHM as well as through AIIMS Bhopal website. So, maybe follow-up questions can come up in future sessions as well. I would take this opportunity to thank our two esteemed speakers, Dr. Abhishek Singhai and Dr. Ambar Kumar, who have enlightened us on these so-called difficult topics, because we don't have any firm guidelines as far as either of those. It's more important as far as to understand the condition and to be alert that you can have post-COVID symptoms and how to take certain symptoms more seriously, especially if you have dyspnea, oxygen saturation going down. We also had a good talk from Dr. Ambar Kumar, who has alerted us towards Kawasaki-like multi-system involvement in children. So I would like to thank both our speakers. I would also like to thank NHM to have allowed this activity to be disseminated across the state, and JPIGO, who are providing us support in terms of dissemination as well as technical support in conducting this activity. And lastly, to end, we would have this on a regular basis. So our next webinar will be on 1st of January, where we'll be talking about vaccines and the process of vaccination, and hope we will also gain some more knowledge in between at that point of time. And we are also having subsequent webinars on pulmonary rehabilitation and on public health response to COVID-19 infection. So I'll request all the audience to just follow through with the messages which we will be sending across closer to these dates. But 1st of January and then subsequently every Friday 4 to 5 every month, we have a series of webinars which are being planned. So thank you very much, all the audiences who were there, and also the future audiences who may be accessing the recorded version of this particular webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.